Welcome to Unfiltered Finance. I'm your host, Emily Turner, and joining us today is market expert Alex Reid. And we're talking about something that makes headlines all the time, and yet nothing seems to change about it, and that is congressional trading. So, for folks who maybe don't know what the lay of the land is, what is the landscape here?
I grew up. Uh, my dad was a huge George Carlin fan, the famous comedian from the 80s and 90s. I grew up watching his stand-up, and one of the things, the line that always stuck with me is he had this bit where he said, "It's a big club, and you ain't in it." Uh, and that little line encapsulates about everything you need to know about congressional stock trading.
So, would you categorize it as insider trading?
It's a tough one, right? Because they will say, well, we're just lucky, right? But they outperform hedge funds dedicated to trading the markets. These politicians who ostensibly are not market experts are beating hedge funds that are market experts. So is it insider trading? Is it luck? I think, we all kind of know, even if we maybe can't say it.
Yeah. I mean, in journalism, the kind of the litmus test is like, is it illegal, unethical, or immoral, or is that the end result, whether that's the intention or not? And the answer is it's not illegal. The Congressional Knowledge Act requires that senators and representatives have to disclose, these big transactions within 45 days. But at that point, do they kind of have a lead on whatever is coming down the pipeline?
For sure they do. There's a lot of moral gray area here. And, yes, they have to file, but oftentimes they just don't, or they're late to filing. And the penalty for it it's somewhere in the tens to a couple hundred of dollars. So if you have folks like uh, our esteemed former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, making millions off these trades, well, it's sort of a cost of doing business, to pay a couple $100 to when
Well,
they don't file in time.
I mean, it's a slap on the wrist comparatively. I mean, you brought up Nancy Pelosi. Just a few days ago, she made headlines for selling off PayPal, and then the stock slumped.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean it's impeccable. It's impeccable timing, isn't it? I mean, look, there's entire portfolios dedicated to tracking these politicians, and they outperform, the S&P 500 many many times over. So.
I mean, if someone wanted to follow this, because like you said, I mean, there are all sorts of options out there for people who want to just copycat those trades.
Mhm.
But by the time they are disclosed, if they're disclosed at all, I mean, with a 45-day lag at best, is it almost too late?
It can be. You have to be knowledgeable about what you're looking for. And like I said, that going back to that George Carlin quote, it's a big club and you ain't in it. We're not just talking about politicians here. A lot of people don't know this because we remember hearing about Martha Stewart, right? Getting tagged for insider trading. But it's not just the politicians that can do this stuff. It's the company insiders themselves. They do have more stringent requirements than, say, politicians, but these CEOs, these execs, these CFOs of, the major companies on the market. They're all going to the same yacht club as these politicians. They're all going to the same galas and the same fundraising dinners and with each other and with the politicians. And so to think that they're not all talking, and like anyone would do, right, at the backyard barbecue, whether that's in DC or New York or LA or wherever.
Or white tie?
Well, exactly. Think they're not talking about stuff is just silly to me for someone to say that. But these insiders, they can legally file, legally trade their stocks that they are in charge of. And so, you know, they have to report within 48 hours. And so while it is difficult to track the politicians because of that delay, it's really basically lax reporting requirements. It is more substantial reporting requirements for these insider executives. They have to report within 48 hours what they do. And what's really cool about it is if you know where to look, you can watch all this unfold in real time and align it with your own trading analysis. But another cool thing about it is that if they are a 10% owner or board member or whatever in the company, they do they do have to hold for 6 months for the stock. So that means that basically they're tying up a ton of capital for the next 6 months. And so if you are a little late, it should be okay, because it's on a little longer time horizon and you're getting in a little quicker than if you were just solely trying to piggyback off the politicians by themselves.
When you talk about watching it unfold in real time, how does somebody do that? Where do you even go to look?
So, yeah, so the Securities and Exchange Commission, they operate it's a database and it's called a Form 4 filing. And this is what the executives have to file every time they move shares to whether that's selling or buying. And you can actually follow those. Now, there's thousands of these reported every single day almost because there's stock investment, there's options compensation plans. So you really need to have a way to filter out sort of just the mechanical share purchases, as part of a compensation plan versus the ones where they're actually going into their own wallet and they're saying, I'm gonna, put out a couple mil on my stock. Now there's ways you do that. I do have a database that I kind of created that helps me filter through that and find the good ones, but it's part of one of our trading strategies. But yeah, the information is out there if you are dedicated enough to look for it.
Yeah, well, we'll be sure to include a link to that because I'm sure people are going to be really interested in it in the description below. You mentioned Martha Stewart and insider trading there. What
Yeah.
is the difference between what she did and, for example, I was looking up some examples, and Representative Lisa McClain, who bought $250,000 of SpaceX private stock, but sits on the Armed Services Subcommittee of Cyber Info Technology Innovation, which, of course, we all know now the military is using XAI. Like, what is the difference realistically between those two things, or is there?
Well, that's why this is so pervasive is because it's really hard to prove in a court of law what they're doing. Maybe the execs or the politicians are just better at reading the tea leaves. But there's such a wide moat that you could drive through in terms of the legalese on this that it's hard for in a legal sense to say what is the difference between insider trading or just routinely picking the best stocks over and over again. It's turned out very hard to prove in a court of law.
I wish I had that kind of luck.
We all do, right?
So why is this allowed to continue? Why doesn't it change?
Well, because it turns out that the people who do it are the ones making the laws, right? So there's a vested interest in not changing the laws. I have a sort of a counterintuitive take on this. I think that we actually should pay our Congress people more, to represent us than we do, just because while people are like, well, I don't want to pay them more. But the thing is you'd be surprised at how cheap some of these people are. And if you give them more money, they might be a little less inclined to double dip. And this would track down to, insider trading stock, to taking lobbying money, whether that's domestic or foreign. So I think in general, my view is maybe counterintuitive to what a lot of people think. We probably should pay them more so they don't feel the pressure to do that.
Hmm. So for folks who, are trying to manage their portfolio as well as Nancy Pelosi, what is your advice to them? I mean, because likely they're not going to sit there looking through the SEC filings.
Right. Well, you could always, tune into some of our shows. We talk about a lot of these insider tradings, more on the insider executive tradings. So, CEOs, CFOs, board members, CTOs, all that jazz. There's also a lot of really great X accounts you can subscribe to. One of them, is on the nose. Nancy Pelosi stock tracker. That's a great one. Uh, you can follow. They post a lot of different politician buys. You can follow Quiver Quantitative. They are also a really good resource for it on X. And there's a few other accounts that I can't name off the top of my head, but yeah, like the information is out there. Trust me, there are people who track this stuff full time. And I'm just looking right now, Hecla stock from this account, Quiver Quantitative, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Back in 2004, she bought a huge stake in Hecla Mining, which is up 295% since then. So, and if you had followed, and they posted it, so even though maybe you didn't get the initial gains, even though the filing and reporting requirements were late, I think actually, Debbie is a little. She's always traditionally a little late to the reporting. She's been fined a few times, I believe. But you would still be looking pretty solid. Maybe you didn't get 295%, right? Maybe you got 250%, but that's still a really, really good return for just following these folks.
It's amazing when you look at the graphs of how elected leaders outperform the S&P 500. I mean, it's staggering.
It sure is. It sure is. Here we are trying to do technical analysis or options flows, and turns out knowledge and information may be the greatest arbitrage opportunity there is in the markets.
Well, that's the key takeaway. Alex, thank you so much for your time and all of your insight. I appreciate it.